Hi, I'm Weston LaBar, and I'm here today to do another episode of People on the Move, a Cargomatic podcast. I'm very excited today to have the CEO of TRAC, one of our big partners throughout the pandemic and beyond, a big part of the supply chain, making sure we have the wheels to move the containers. Dan Walsh, CEO of TRAC, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Delighted to be here, Weston. Appreciate the invitation, and thank you, as always, for your business.
No, yeah. Well, you keep bringing us the chassis, and we'll keep moving the freight.
That's the job. We're in the business of saying yes to our customers. You guys have been great partners. We appreciate it very much.
So it's funny, 5 years ago, most people didn't know what a chassis was, but during the pandemic, if you watch the nightly news, everybody knows what a chassis is, to the point where my wife at Thanksgiving will say, chassis, that's the piece of steel with wheels on it you put containers on. So I know that the general public has gotten an edification on chassis, but maybe it would be great for our viewers and listeners if you could bring us up to speed on where the chassis market is at. And when I say market, just what's going on in your industry, because COVID probably for you guys was the tale of two cities and the biggest impact for anybody, because you started in a sluggish part of COVID where you had equipment on terminals that they were telling you to get off. And then fast forward 6 months later, you have no chassis anywhere because people are using them as storage. And then now, where are we?
Well, good question. And look, you're right. It's been a tumultuous few years. I mean, basically, as participants in the supply chain, we were caught up in the same phenomenon that many of the other players were. And that was basically, in COVID, a cessation of all volume and all the challenges that go with that, followed by a massive surge. And then a pretty hard reset after a couple of years, back into the start of 23 and throughout the year. So I think where we are is not dissimilar to where a lot of our customers are, where a lot of our peers are, where a lot of our other industry partners are. And that is coming off a fairly good couple of years, but trying because of congestion issues and frustrations that were experienced around service and so forth, because of the inability of the supply chain to handle the massive volume that we had at the pace which people desired, even though I will say with all humility, I think the participants in the North American supply chain did a wonderful job, both during COVID and especially post-COVID in handling that whole period and whole dynamic. So for us, I think we've coped relatively well. With all humility, I would say that we saw in 21 and 22 that the volumes that we were experiencing weren't going to last forever. And so we made a few moves, to try and ensure that when that volume did dissipate, it wasn't catastrophic for our business or the performance of our business. And fortunately, they've come off. So we're very well placed. I think we learned a couple of things, during that period, like everybody else. And the key one, I would say, was we have to continue to invest, good times, bad times. We need to add new units to our fleet, upgrade the existing units, refurbish, improve the quality, put a safe, reliable, high quality piece of equipment out there on the road for our customers. And we've continued to do that in the last 10 years. We've pumped in over $1 billion, and we've no plans to slow down. So we believe in the ongoing growth of the industry. We understand that it's cyclical, but we're committed to investing. And then the second thing that I would say is that I do think that whole period showed that we have a bunch of opportunity. We're not very good at sharing data. There was an article today somewhere about the amount of paper that's used to move the logistics globally. It's like 4 billion pieces of paper or something. I think there's a real opportunity for us to catch up.
We're in a conference where people are talking about Chat GPT on panels and automating things. Meanwhile, it's really hard to automate a piece of paper, right?
Exactly.
So you got to get that data into a system, and it's crazy to me in a world where you have the technology for paperless PODs, paperless interchanges. I mean, all the technology's there. And the answer you get is, well, we just don't do it that way. And I think that's the biggest thing, is this pandemic has taught the entire industry that we don't do it that way is not an acceptable answer anymore. You have to be a proactive, solutions-based company if you want to continue to exist. And when you're looking at your role in the overall supply chain, are you making the lives of your customers easier? Or are you one of the pain points? If you're making their life easier, you're going to grow.
Yeah.
If you're one of the pain points, when a market is down, you're going to become obsolete. And depending on where the market fluctuation is, that's why 31,000 trucking companies, for instance, have gone out of business, because they either were not suited for the I'll call it the post ridiculous spot market that we were in, but they also maybe were a pain point for their customers. And that's where companies like ours and yours have been able to go out and be a solutions-driven partner who said, you know what, I don't need 50 vendors anymore. I'm going to consolidate it down to one or two, and I'm only going to work with the folks that made my life easier.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that the whole COVID phenomenon, again, accelerated, in my mind, the growth of e-commerce by a decade inside that 24-month window.
Yep.
And I think that it was really a manifestation of changing consumer behaviour and associated expectation. So consumers, they want to be able to buy stuff online, they want it delivered faster, and they want to be able to return it for free.
And that reverse logistics component is the part that everybody's struggling with.
Yeah.
People don't realize, especially what I find to be funny is when people are so conscious about their carbon footprint, they're going online and they're booking the flight based on the carbon emissions, because you can see that now, yet they'll order a shirt or a pair of pants or a dress in 7 colors, keep one, send them all back, not realizing that the better thing they could have done is gone to the store and try them on and bring it home. But to your point, COVID even forced people like my grandparents, who don't know how to turn a computer on, to start getting things delivered, maybe with a little help from their grandson, to their house because they couldn't leave and go to the market.
Yeah, and look, I just think you can't unring that bell. I think that change has happened and it's not going back. And if you look at retail sales, the percentage of e-commerce inside of retail sales is only forecast to grow. I think it's forecast to grow by 15 to 17 points next year. And that's just going to continue. And so I think for us in the logistics space, we're just going to have to learn to service those expectations. And that means we have to become more efficient, more attuned to what the consumer wants. And critically, to your point, use the tools that are available to improve the customer experience. And if we don't do that, we're going to be forced to do that, because I think that the big retailers in particular, they understand now that if they can't communicate with their customers in a way which is driven primarily by electronics and access to a portal and a smooth technologically backed customer interface, and then support that with the requisite service, then they're going to lose. So they're going to push that expectation through the supply chain. And the people that understand that and are prepared to adjust their behaviours to work with that are going to win. And the people who are either unwilling or unable, in my opinion, are going to exit.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, because I think both for you and in the trucking sector, almost every single one of our sectors, I think that you really have companies that want to provide high value services, but in many cases, depending on where the market is, they're competing as a commodity, right? Yeah. Essentially a low priced commodity, when we're really, the expectation is a high value service. Yeah. And I think that's a great segue, because there's been a lot of technological advancements in the chassis game. And believe it or not, people look at it on the road and they're like, well, there's a blue piece of steel with wheels on it, there's a green one. Like they don't know the difference. But really, when you're running a company, you're providing differentiators. Yeah. And I'd love for you to talk, whether it's, I know we've done some work with mutual customers where we've had private fleets and they've been GPS'd, or we're working through a tracking portal and integrating with one another. So your visibility and our visibility are marrying for redundancy. Talk about what TRAC's doing in the market, because believe it or not, all these companies, the piece of the chassis looks similar, but there's a very different business model and approach to how you leverage that asset. Yeah,
completely right. So, actually, technology is massive for us. We handle almost 2 million EDI transactions every single day. We have a custom-built operating platform called Helix. We've fully migrated away from all our land servers into the cloud, and that's given us access to cutting-edge technology. And I'm proud to say that we're one of the first, I think we are the first, participant in our segment of the industry to utilise artificial intelligence to manage down operating costs, and that's through a product that we have in play. It's already operational, called Roadstar AI, which it basically is an algorithm that reviews the activity of our thousands of vendors working on our 200,000 units at our 600 locations and looks for anomalies. with respect to, unnecessary billing, overbilling, inaccurate billing, and calls them out, and it lets us work with our vendors to make sure that they're working on the asset as needed, and that we're not burdening our business with unnecessary cost. Now that's back-end looking, because you need the invoice to actually do that work. The next stage of that is called Roadstar Idle, which will be looking at that in real time. So, we are investing a ton of money into our technological capabilities. It's a differentiator for us because it allows us to provide a better quality unit and to support our customers, but it also helps us manage our operating costs and ensure the viability of our business. And so for us, there's no end to the technological investment. We've worked really hard to change our profile, and we see it as a differentiator, to your point.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, and I'm glad to hear you guys are implementing AI. I think everybody is trying to figure out how to do it. Most people are downloading ChatGPT and maybe using it for job postings or something like that. Yeah. But it's interesting because if we go back to the pandemic, talking about anomalies, Pool of Pools, which is my backyard. You've got a situation where the pool was built for units to be out 3 days. And typically the average was less than 3 days. And then you get to a point where it's over 10 days.
Exactly.
And that's where it wasn't that you didn't have enough chassis. You had chassis that were being used 3 times longer than the pool was designed for overnight. What I think is so interesting is when you start to see that, it allows you guys to make faster decisions. To your point, it's not that we don't do a good job in our segments in the supply chain. Let's be honest, 90% of the time when there's not a pandemic, nobody thinks about the supply chain because things show up where they're supposed to show up when they're supposed to show up. So when, in my world, whenever I'm dealing about trucking or when I ran the HTA, it was almost always about emissions or labor issues. It was all traffic. Meanwhile, we're all trying to figure out how to give the consumer, essentially, at the end of the day, the opportunity to focus on the things that they think are negative with our industry because we're fulfilling all their expectations without them realizing it. So I think that was the shock. But to your point, by using technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, you can. I've always felt like the technology gives people the opportunity to do fire suppression as opposed to firefighting.
Oh, completely. And I mean, look, I think that I agree with what you say about the supply chain, and I really want to just come back for a minute to the performance of the people in the supply chain. I'll say in North America, but globally too, I would expect. But I think in North America it was a fantastic performance. Basically, everything stopped, and then volume came back at like 30 or 40 points above what it normally is. To your point, assets were being utilised at 100%. The amount of time they were out in the field tripled. And the system creaked, but it never stopped. Things kept moving, and you're right. Suddenly, it became a lot more interesting to be, caught up in a conversation at parties, in the sense that people would actually talk to you when you told them what you did for a living.
Where's my Amazon package? We see the boats out there.
Let me explain to you what you need to do to fix the supply chain. There was a fair bit of that. Everyone had an opinion, even my auntie. And I think. People realise just how central it is to the way they want to live their lives. They want to be able to say, hey, I want this, and then they expect it to come. And if it doesn't come, it's like, well, how can that possibly be? I can't live like that. And so there was a greater realisation, but with that came the burden of expectation. And I think, look, we stood up to it reasonably well. Not everything went perfectly, but we got through it. Now things are normalising, but it would be a crying shame if we didn't use the extra oxygen that we have now to make ourselves better, and at least acknowledge that there's a bunch of stuff that could be done way more efficiently than it's done now, because it's done now how it was done 30 years ago, and there's a million ways you can do it better.
There's two things that I think typically are the downfall when we have these. And COVID, I looked at as you never let a good crisis go to waste.
Oh, yeah, completely.
I felt like it was an opportunity to get the slow movers and the naysayers to do things because they had to, not because let's be honest, there's a lot of people that have over time built business models that benefit when there's congestion and when things don't move. Yet there's a lot of us that are saying we should be making our money when things are moving, like when we're actually doing what our core mission is. And I think that these are the things that coming out of COVID, a lot of people made a lot of money. A lot of people, for the first time, you look at the ocean carriers, profitable. They made back the debt for generations in 2 years, and then some. And talk a little bit, because you guys are continuing to invest.
Yeah.
There are companies that are preserving capital.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the folks that have the gold should be making the rules right now,
Yeah.
not hiding it in the vault. But talk about that decision, because as a CEO and obviously you're private equity backed and they've got expectations on returns. So navigating, and in a very general sense, but just navigating that preservation of capital versus investment in a down market. Talk a little bit about just how you have to balance those.
Well, look, it's the right question, and as would be expected, Weston, from someone with your knowledge of the industry. Look, what I would say about our company is the following. We're an asset-heavy business, so if you look at the replacement cost of our assets, it's north of $4 billion. And when you've got that much capital invested in your 200,000 units or 190,000 units, you've got to keep them moving. And for them to be moving, they have to be attractive to the customer, and they have to be ready to go. And I think one of the great things about Stonepeak, who own TRAC, is that they're committed to the industry. They understand cycles. And really what we see this current lapse in volume as is a massive opportunity for us to prepare for the next surge, which is definitely coming. We think it is most likely to be second half of 24.
I predict post-Lunar New Year, you're going to see there's still, people don't realize that we still have really strong consumer spending. It's just, what are they spending on? We went from a 70% service economy to like a 99.9% goods economy at one point in time, and then back to a 70% services economy, but right when all the goods started showing up at warehouses. And you talk to some big retailers, they'll tell you, I have 8 months of grills in warehouses. Their problem is there's things they have to store that nobody's buying, and then there's stuff that people are buying that they have to figure out how to get in. And that's the conundrum that they're all dealing with. And I think, and listen, this is something that I've had people much smarter than me say as well, so it's just always good to feel validated. But Lunar New Year will get here, and we'll start to see what really the next cycle of our supply chain is. And I can't say the new normal, because normal changes every day.
No, I agree. And the Retail Federation, National Retail Federation, in my opinion, do a very good job of forward-looking forecasting. And they are basically saying that if you look at the key critical metrics, which is the sales to inventory ratio, it's basically bottomed out, which means we're getting to the bottom of the inventory surplus that we had. And to your point about consumers, they're still spending, and there's going to come a point where they're going to pull that volume towards the retailers, and the retailers are going to pull it towards the ports and the terminals and the rail ramps, and we're going to be off and running. What we can't do at that point is say, look, we did a really good job, and we didn't invest in anything, during the down period, and now sadly that the volume's here, it's going to take us 6 months to be ready to go. We've got to be ready to go at that time.
Easter Sunday showed up, and we didn't build the church when we had the time, and so now we got to figure out how we're going to make it work.
And I think that in the past there's been the temptation to really screw down, and say, well, look, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. We understand now that a steady stream of investment is required. We're committed to that, and that's on three things basically, or four, but on the asset side, adding new units, we can continue to add new units to our pool, refurbishing and upgrading our existing fleet, like extending the useful life of our assets, getting them to the level of quality that is appropriate for the service offering that they're supporting, and then technology, which we've talked about, we've got to continue to invest in that. So, for us, it's a very clear mandate, we're always investing.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about the uniqueness of the chassis market in the U.S.? And what I mean is, ironically, right before the pandemic, the International Trade Commission put duties on China, which took the biggest chassis producer in the world out of the American market at a time when we needed chassis the most, especially new units. Because you've talked several times about putting new units in your fleet. The other unintended consequences was many of the components that the chassis in the U.S. use were from China and on that list as well. And obviously, we just went through a period where people were not going to offices and whatnot, and now you have to ramp up your manufacturing workforce very quickly. All in a market that is very unique. I don't think people realize the uniqueness of the U.S. chassis market, because throughout the world, I mean, you're from Australia, mostly the motor carrier owns the chassis, and that's part of the equation. Here, I think we have a great model in the sense that we're blending the best practices between shared pool resources, private, customer, private fleets, et cetera. So talk a little bit about that, because the dynamic of CIMC going out of the market, American manufacturers ramping up, you guys fighting for purchase orders, and now you're coming out of it and you're saying, well, now we can do some unique things with the U.S. chassis market. I don't think people realize it's not that you've got chassis that you bought and you're regretting it. You're like, what can I do with these?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that look, that was one of those. It was a great example, in my opinion, of the unintended
short-sightedness of
unintended consequences of regulation. And I'm not saying that it wasn't warranted. The decision was taken by President Trump to impose the tariffs on China, and then the Trade Commission with the countervailing duties. Basically, 90% of the world's chassis were manufactured in China, and then they were taken completely off the board. At the same time, volume surged by between 35 and 40 points.
And utilization went up, like I said, tripling in places like Los Angeles.
Exactly. So, there was the market was distorted because it was capacity constrained. And then the challenge was for the American manufacturers in that new reality and others to step into that void and fill it. And if you believe in the free market, like I do, then eventually that's going to correct. But there were some teething problems along the way. I think everybody would
timing was not ideal.
Everybody would concede that. It was a baptism of fire. It was a very high pressure situation. And look, we've partnered very effectively with the American manufacturers. There've been new entrants into the market, which is again a good example of the market working properly. And we feel now that there's a good range of supply available across multiple providers to deliver the chassis that are needed to support the ongoing development of the market. You mentioned before about choice. There is like a wide range of choice. You've got the pooling, you've got trucker owned, you've got private pools, you've got
co-ops.
So the key takeaway for me is this: when it comes to chassis, in North America, there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all. There is no model that you could apply nationally on every terminal, on every rail ramp, in every market, and have it work perfectly. If you just think about it for a minute, the geographies, the regulations, the characteristics, the profile of the customers, there's so much variation.
You look at the cargo regulations.
Exactly.
In Southern California, you've got an 80,000-pound gross weight limit unless you have special permits, which require special equipment. You go up to a state like Washington, you can haul. They have quad axle chassis first of all, which you don't find anywhere else, and they have much higher weight limits, over 100,000 pounds. So just your equipment needs to be built specifically for where you're sending it based on the cargo coming in and out.
I completely agree. And the other great example is space. You think about the South Atlantic. They've done a tremendous job down there building, the business that they've got there. But basically, 20 years ago, that was open space. Now it's a fully operational distribution centre, marine terminal, et cetera, all the way up the coast. And whereas the teams that are managing LA and Long Beach and New York and New Jersey, and doing a fantastic job, by the way, in the nation's biggest ports, are just seeing their space being diluted day by day, as various entities encroach onto what was previously land that was assigned for the operation of the management and receipt of cargo. So those very real and easily identifiable dynamics, in my opinion, necessitate different operating models. And so this notion that there's one model that should be put in place everywhere, in my mind, if you think about it seriously for 5 minutes, you realise that's a complete fallacy.
Absolutely. It's almost that old adage, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So just switching gears a little bit, 2024, we talked a little bit about what we think, crystal ball from a volume perspective, but I think that 2024 has a unique opportunity, again, to redefine this industry. Not necessarily chassis specific, but you've got clean air regulations in places like California that's going to reduce the truck fleet. So all of a sudden, let's just say you take roughly 30% of the available trucks out of the rail and port drayage market. And then at the same time, on the East Coast, you have a unique situation where the ILA and the employers are not all on the same page, which usually they get things done in advance, so nobody worries about it. And they've got their own unique, localized issues with Leatherman and other ports. So there's a potential perfect storm brewing, and then there's just a million things that you could talk about that could be industry changing over the next 12 months. What do you think are going to be some of the big things we actually see come to fruition in 2024 that will be redefining for the industry? And where do you see, you talked about growth and market share. The irony that people forget is that the ports of LA Long Beach continue to grow from a volume perspective. It's just they're losing market share because there's more volume to move, and other markets have addressed the concerns and needs of shippers, allowing them to implement four-corner strategies, giving out very cushy tax credits to build distribution centers. I mean, I love what Stephen Edwards has done here at the Port of Virginia with a lot of the rail infrastructure and partnerships they've created. What do you think 2024, when we look back here a year from now and we say these things really defined the year, what are those going to be?
Well, look, the first thing I'd say is, don't you just love America? There's always something going on, and in the industry that we're...
It's a presidential election.
Yeah, that's right. And in the industry that we're in, if you can't handle ambiguity, you should go work at the post office or do something else, because like the guaranteed thing about our industry is that there's going to be challenges, there's going to be change, there's going to be unanticipated developments, which are going to either give you an opportunity or create pressure or both. Guaranteed.
The only certainty is uncertainty.
Yeah, completely. And I think that, again, just looking across the industry, and, I'd include you in this, Weston, in all seriousness, but, there's very talented leaders in this industry because they're really good at managing ambiguity and managing through a troubled sea and doing it effectively. So, I'm extremely confident that there's going to be change, but we're going to handle it, right? And in terms of what those changes will be, I would say three things. I hope that it doesn't come to pass, but I do think that the geopolitical risk of disruption to our supply chains is as high as it's been in the last 25 years. And I think you have a war on continental Europe, you have tension in the South Pacific. Sometimes in America that can feel a long way away. Those of us that work in
unless you're going to get gasoline in California.
Exactly.
Paying $7 a gallon.
Yeah, well, exactly right. Or, you happen to think about, well, how am I going to get my grain, that gets its way into my bread that I used to feed my children, et cetera, and then you realise how interconnected all of this stuff is, and I think that there's some very material black clouds there that are going to need to be managed carefully by the global community. Otherwise, they could have a very pronounced effect.
Well, one thing, I'm hoping a lot of domestic manufacturers here in America learned out of the Trump era tariffs. A lot of them were super excited because they felt like they were eliminating their competition. At the same time, a lot of them were just assembling components built all over the world, many of which made in China, when they realized they're impacted by the duties as well. And you bring something up I think so important is, it doesn't matter whether something's being built in Europe or China or in the backyard of Central America, USA. Most manufacturers are logistics companies that design a product, bring everything to one spot and assemble it, right? They don't really build any of things that go in it. And what does that mean? When you talk about disruption, that could mean increased cost of transportation. It's all inflationary because you're going to end up with people competing over the scarcity of a resource or a widget that now is not readily available in the global market.
And look, you can see a manifestation of that in President Biden's decision to declare, semiconductors and microchips a national security issue and bring that production onshore. And take it away from the other global regions where we're perhaps more exposed. And so I think that this kind of nexus between geopolitical risk and nearshoring is something that could manifest itself in material changes, in products that we move. Right? And I think that that's something that we need to understand, and that could hit in 24. How, I don't know, but I think people need to be very cognizant of that. And if I could send, one message to myself and other people, in the industry, it's really to understand just how deeply integrated globalisation is to the North American economy. There may be designs around decoupling, around, from certain partners, nearshoring more of our activity. but that's going to be a tall order. It's going to take time. So disruptions in other parts of the world are going to hit us. The second thing I would say is, I do think that the movement of production or manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, assembling, out of China into other parts of Asia, and then potentially a trade route through the Suez Canal to the East Coast, may change how goods are distributed inside North America. You make a really good point, and I think the West Coast management are doing a fantastic job, in growing back, and taking back some of the business that went away. But historically, not all of it's come back.
On average, they think about 5% is gone forever.
Yeah.
And then there's about 10 to 15% total that's vulnerable to be gone forever. And that's the stuff that they're really fighting for, is to basically marginalize the losses.
Yeah. So I think that, the battle is joined there, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But I do think for certain products, it's more viable to go to the East Coast than it's been in the past. So for us as a provider with a national presence, we're on every rail ramp, every port. That's not.
So are we.
Yeah, it's not so much an issue for us, exactly. But I think you do have to think about, what does the South Atlantic look like? What's the Gulf look like? You look at some of their growth numbers. LA, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, they're massive. They'll always be massive. But how's the product going to be distributed in North America compared to how it's been in the past? I think that a lot of that will be visible in 2024. And look, the other thing that I would say, and we don't talk about it enough in this industry, in my opinion, and I include myself in that, business is a war for talent. And we need talent in our industry. Yep. We need new talent in our industry. We've got great people here. They're fantastic people, but they're, like you and I, Weston, we've been doing this for a long time. We need people coming through who think differently, look differently, talk differently, act differently, are different.
Yep.
And approach complex challenges differently. We need more talent in our industry, and we've got to go get it because everyone else wants it. And basically, in my opinion, I'm getting wound up. You've got me going on something. Look, unless we win the war for talent, we are always going to struggle.
I think that's a great point, because I have the opportunity to be part of our internal team. Very exciting to redo our Cargomatic University. Our leadership from our CEO down believes in education, hands-on training. So we have a complete reboot.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest reasons we realized we need to do that is because we need to start attracting talent from other industries and from other areas of the supply chain into ours. I mean, you talked about talent in the beginning and people. I would say it's not just our technology, but you look at the people. I mean, I came from trucking, but we got Ed Aldridge, who came as the president of the largest, trans-Pacific shipping company in CMA CGM, and
great
legend in the industry.
Great leader.
Our CEO built technology for the rail and has been very successful. I could go on and on and on. Yeah. But we've put a group of people together that understand the mission and the vision and can take the technology and leverage it to help really grow this company in a way that benefits the supply chain. I think that's what a lot of technology companies struggle with, is they've got folks that might rather be programming for a dating app, then they've got other people that are from the industry trying to teach them that don't believe in the technology. Yeah. You have a skills gap. We really need to not just train people the right way, but to your point, it's about that first initial step of attracting them. It's getting involved in the universities. It's making sure we have really good supply chain programs, because let's be honest, if you're at a trucking company, almost everybody that comes through, a lot of them don't even have a college diploma. They started working at a trucking company, worked their way up from a driver all the way to an executive. Yeah. And I think that's one of the great stories in America.
It's same here.
I believe in that story. Yeah. But at the same time, as the industry's shifting, as we need to become more sophisticated, less tactical, and more strategic, we need to attract the right talent. And I think it really starts with this. During the pandemic, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, people realize how essential this industry is. Yeah. Thank you, healthcare workers, but they couldn't have helped save a single life if the supply chain didn't keep the PPE and the vaccines and the equipment showing up, right? Yeah. To your point, there's not a person in this world that doesn't rely on the supply chain as a whole for their quality of life. How great is it now you can have packages show up at your door when you don't have the time to do something? You used to have to carve out time and go do it. And if you're my grandfather, who still doesn't know how to do a lot of things on the internet, as we talked about earlier, he'll say, "Where did you get that? I went down to the store and they were out of that."
Oh, yeah,
well,
yeah.
I just went on their website and it's now at your house. So you're good to go, right? And these are the changes that also we need people to be forward-thinking, visionaries, and again, strategic, not tactical.
Yeah, look, agreed. And again, just coming back to the diversity point, I think that, so I'm old enough to say openly that when I went to college, there was no supply chain course. Didn't exist. It didn't. You couldn't do a master's in supply chain. There was no way. It just wasn't out there. Now, you've got these brilliant courses in top quality educational institutions. And by the way, when it comes to supply chain, fun fact, most of the top graduates are women.
That's
right?
amazing.
In 20 years,
it's necessary,
it's
too,
necessary and it's going to change. But I also think we can't lose the essence of this is a great industry to be in. And you don't need to be a graduate of an Ivy League to be successful here. You need heart, you need courage, you need to be willing to take a risk. A lot of the time you need to be willing to relocate. A lot of people, in our industry have lived in other countries. They have global experience. Yep. They've seen the world and experienced different cultures. Part of the world that's made them great human beings. And I think that proximity of the operators, with the graduates and all thrown in together, to deal with these complex problems. I think that's where a lot of the creative spark that's made our industry so great and the participants in it so great has come from. We just need to accelerate our efforts there. It's not that we're doing anything wrong.
We're playing catch
necessarily. We just got to do more of it, more. And when we get these great people in, let them run something. Don't micromanage them and say, "Hey, listen, this is the way we used to do it back in the 70s. Please make sure you don't do anything different." Just give them a problem, let them fix it.
And layering on, right? Yeah. I've had the pleasure of sitting on the steering committee for the Center of International Trade and Transportation at Cal State Long Beach. So it's really good to get that hands-on, boots on the ground training. But at the same time, I would judge hackathons at USC where the Port of LA would come and give a data set and a problem and say, "You have 48 hours, solve it." We need to introduce technology into these programs because that's where the industry's going. And then also entrepreneurship. I believe this industry has, not just does it spurn so many entrepreneurs to spin out of things, but there's an opportunity to continue to do that. And what I think makes this industry so special are the amount of people that with a good idea, a little bit of intelligence and a lot of grit will work their way to solve a problem that they deal with every day and create a great company out of it.
Well, look at MSC and CMA. They're both family owned.
Yeah.
They're behemoths. And they were started by families, built by families, and now they're still run by families. Yep. And they dominate their segment of the market. I mean, not dominate, but they're key players in their segment of the market by any definition. And I do think that the other thing about our industry, which I think is a great selling point, and I really genuinely mean it, great people work in this industry. Good people. Hardworking, humble, family-oriented, good people. People who, if you ask them for help, if you're humble enough to show some vulnerability, you'll get it. And there is, and you saw this in COVID, just to circle back to that, there's a collective mindset that we're in it together and we're going to make it work together and we've got to help each other.
And we have to.
Yeah, and we have to, for the thing to work. And we can have knock them down, drag them out arguments about this, that and the other. And there'll be things about which we bitterly disagree. But at the end of the day, this is a community. We're all part of it. And we're proud of what we provided.
Codependent.
And I thought Bob Sapio, who won the Connie Award over in LA the other night, I saw you there. Yep. I thought he spoke beautifully when he got the award. And one of the things he said was, we don't have to be perfect to be proud of what we do. And I thought that was a really good comment. When no one's looking for perfection here, because it's just so complex that's going to be, nigh on impossible. But we've got to embrace the challenge of continuous improvement. We've got to embrace the opportunities to get better, and we've got to accept that there are a bunch of things that we do today that really could be done a hell of a lot better, and we just got to make those changes.
Yeah, and it's I think the biggest thing is what you talked about is getting everybody to find that common opportunity to work together and understand at the end of the day, we're trying to provide a great service to our mutual customers, right? And I think what's so important about that is much of the delays happen in those, I say this is like a relay race where everybody's blindfolded. You're trying to hand the baton off, but you don't know where to drop this container or where that container needs to be picked up. And that part is, I think, the part that's being solved the most rapidly
Yeah.
is how do we, through API and EDI integrations, through just through the visibility, through actually using our data as opposed to having data and doing nothing with it, and the ability to just reduce those handoffs, doing things at marine terminals. I remember when I first started, I won't say who, but one of the terminals in LA would tell me it takes 40 minutes to drive their property, even if you're not doing a transaction. I said, well, that sounds like a terrible operation. We set it up that way.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And then now you've got terminals that are looking at how to introduce technology to be smarter about knowing what box goes with what truck. We have a long way to go there, but they're doing it. In some cases, they've introduced different forms of automation that bring the container to the trucker, so you're not driving through a 400-acre facility. Like these are, people don't realize these are innovations.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, we have to constantly innovate. And look, I think that we've got a really good track record on that with all humility. It's just that the expectations have been accelerated, I think, on the consumer, which is going to put more pressure on us. You know, basically, the timeframes that existed before are just going to get more compressed. You mentioned the move towards sustainable fuels and so forth, as opposed to fossil fuels, and making sure that the carbon footprint or environmental impact is minimised. That's not going away. That's going to accelerate. And so get on board or.
And if you live in a place like California, you're going, we should have a national approach to this. We shouldn't do a 50-state piecemeal approach.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think that there really needs to be a more consideration given to how this is going to take place, in my opinion, that has been done so far.
Well, the same collaboration that we preach about on the private sector side, the government needs to have all those agencies collaborate, because when you have when you have an air quality agency like the California Air Resources Board say, we've established a path to zero emissions, now we're going to go talk with the other agencies about the infrastructure to do it. Oh, and by the way, this starts next year. You're talking about the tail wagging the dog, because that infrastructure should be built 10 years before there's a mandate.
No, completely agree.
Tested, put in place, redundant.
Otherwise, it'll fail.
Exactly.
And then that's going to just put more pressure on everybody. So I think that you're absolutely right. The public-private partnership has to be there. The timelines need to be, practical. And a pragmatic approach needs to be taken. But they're also, I think, people who are still thinking, well, maybe this thing should all just go away. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, Dan, this has been a fantastic conversation. Any final thoughts for the viewers or listeners?
Oh, well, three things. I just want to say, first of all, thank you very much again for giving me the time. Appreciate talking to you. It's always great to have a chat. Weston,
Agreed.
Great to see everything that's going on with Cargomatic. You guys are really brilliant partners for us, and we appreciate your business. We don't take it for granted. And look, the third thing that I would say is, I believe in growth. We're in the business of growing our business. I think the future for all of us in the supply chain industry, and the maritime supply chain in particular, is really bright. I think it's up and to the right all the way, and we're going to come back strong, from where we are at the moment, which has been a hard reset and a difficult time for a lot of people that we care about. But I think our industry is cyclical, and good times are just around the corner. I just want to keep it going.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We're really happy to have you.
Oh,
Great insights, really, about again, such an essential piece of equipment, an essential industry. I want to thank you for joining us, Dan Walsh, CEO of TRAC. Again, great partners of ours, and this has been another episode of People on the Move from VMA 2023.